You wake before dawn with an aching body. At first, it feels like nothing more than exhaustion. But within hours, a burning fever takes hold. Your head pounds. Every movement sends pain through your muscles. Then you notice something even worse. A painful swelling has appeared beneath your arm. By sunset, another forms near your neck. Your family stares in silence. Your neighbors avoid your door. The village priest whispers prayers instead of offering comfort. No one knows what is happening. No one knows how to stop it. For most of human history, this wasn't a nightmare. It was everyday reality. Long before hospitals, antibiotics, or even the idea that invisible organisms could spread disease, one terrifying plague swept across continents, erased entire communities, and changed the future of civilization forever. Today, historians call it the Black Death, but the real horror wasn't only the staggering number of lives it claimed. It was the helplessness. People watched healthy friends collapse within days. Entire households disappeared before anyone understood what was happening. Parents buried children. Children wandered empty streets searching for parents who would never wake again. Imagine living in a world where every cough, every fever, every knock on the door could mean death was only hours away. Here's the thing. Humanity had survived ice ages, predators, famine, and war. Your ancestors had learned to hunt mammoths, cross deserts, and build great civilizations from stone and wood. Yet none of those dangers spread as quickly as disease. Unlike a hungry wolf, you couldn't fight it. Unlike an invading army, you couldn't see it coming. Unlike a storm, you couldn't hide until it passed. It moved silently. One traveler, one flea, one rat. That was sometimes all it took. Scientists now know the disease was caused by a bacterium called Yersinia pestis. A bacterium is a microscopic living organism so small that millions could fit on the tip of a needle. People in the Middle Ages had no idea these invisible microbes existed. Many believed the plague was a punishment from God. Others blamed poisoned wells, strange stars, or evil spirits carried through the air. Without understanding the real cause, every attempt to stop it became little more than desperate guesswork, and the plague rewarded every mistake. The story likely began thousands of kilometers away in the grasslands of Central Asia. Wild rodents carried the bacteria naturally. Fleas feeding on infected animals became tiny biological weapons without anyone realizing it. As merchants traveled the Silk Road carrying silk, spices, gold, and precious stones, something else traveled with them: death. Ships crossing the Mediterranean unknowingly transported infected rats hiding among cargo. Every busy port became another doorway for the disease. Trade had made civilizations richer than ever before. It also connected them in ways no one could have imagined. The very routes that carried prosperity would soon carry catastrophe. In 1347, ships arrived at the Sicilian port of Messina after sailing across the Black Sea. Witnesses described sailors already dying before the ships reached shore. Some were covered in dark swellings. Others were barely alive. Instead of welcoming valuable cargo, people were suddenly greeted by floating cemeteries. But it was already too late. The rats had left the ships. The fleas had found new hosts. The disease had found millions of people who had never encountered it before. Within months, panic spread faster than news itself. No kingdom was prepared. No city was safe. No family was guaranteed tomorrow. And this was only the beginning. Word spread slowly. Death moved quickly. At first, many towns believed the plague was someone else's problem. A distant city had fallen. A caravan had gone silent. A port had closed its gates. Those were tragedies, but they felt far away. Then the first neighbor became sick. then another, then an entire household disappeared. Within weeks, fear became more contagious than the disease itself. The Black Death followed the busiest trade routes like water flowing downhill. Merchants unknowingly carried infected fleas hidden among fabrics, grain, and supplies. Every crowded marketplace became another opportunity. Every harbor welcomed not only goods, but also invisible passengers that no customs officer could ever inspect. Europe had never been more connected, and that connection became its greatest weakness. Here's the thing. Cities in the 14th century were perfect breeding grounds for disaster. Most streets were narrow and crowded. Animals wandered freely between homes. Waste was often dumped directly into the streets. Clean drinking water was difficult to find, and thousands of people lived only a few steps away from one another. Nobody understood bacteria. Nobody knew about infection. Nobody had ever heard the word quarantine. Imagine waking each morning unsure whether the person beside you would still be alive before nightfall. In crowded homes, one infected flea could begin a chain reaction that ended with an entire family gone within days. The swollen lymph nodes, called buboes, grew larger and darker as the infection spread through the body. These painful lumps often appeared beneath the arms, around the neck, or near the groin, where the immune system struggled desperately against the invading bacteria. Soon came chills, then fever, then unbearable exhaustion. For many victims, death arrived in less than a week. Modern research estimates that the bubonic form of plague killed between 30 and 60% of infected people without treatment. Even more terrifying was the pneumonic form, which infected the lungs. Once the bacteria reached the respiratory system, victims could spread the disease simply by coughing. Survival became incredibly rare without modern antibiotics. No one knew why some families survived while others vanished completely. To people living through it, the plague seemed almost supernatural. Some believed poisonous air drifted across Europe. Others thought strange planetary alignments had cursed humanity. Many saw the outbreak as divine punishment for human sin. Religious processions filled the streets. Bells rang from churches almost without stopping. People prayed harder than ever before, hoping faith alone could stop an enemy they could neither see nor understand. But the plague listened to no prayers. It followed no borders. It spared no crown. Kings, merchants, priests, farmers, mothers, and children all faced the same invisible enemy. Now, fair question. If the disease was so deadly, why didn't people simply leave? Many tried, and that often made everything worse. Families fled infected towns, carrying little more than food and hope. They unknowingly carried infected fleas in their clothing, blankets, carts, and animals. Every new village became another starting point for the epidemic. Running from death sometimes delivered it to someone else. Historical accounts describe roads filled with abandoned wagons, deserted farms, and villages where silence replaced the sounds of daily life. Travelers entered towns with doors left open, meals still sitting on tables, and churches standing empty except for the dead. The Italian writer Giovanni Boccaccio described people avoiding even their closest relatives out of fear. Parents abandoned children. Friends stopped visiting one another. Ordinary acts of kindness became dangerous risks. Trust itself began to collapse, and when trust disappears, civilization begins to crack. Some cities dug enormous mass graves because there were simply too many bodies to bury one by one. Workers hauled carts through silent streets, collecting the dead before sunrise. In some places, there were not enough healthy people left to perform the burials. Imagine looking outside your window every morning, wondering which house would be empty by tomorrow. The plague was no longer just killing people. It was destroying the invisible threads that held society together. Markets stopped operating. Schools closed. Fields went unharvested, trade collapsed, food became scarce. Even those who escaped the disease often faced hunger soon afterward. By the early 1350s, historians estimate that somewhere between 1/3 and 1/2 of Europe's population had died. Some regions lost even more. Entire communities disappeared from historical records, never to recover. No war in medieval Europe had ever caused destruction on such a scale. And yet, hidden beneath unimaginable tragedy, the Black Death was about to reshape the future of humanity in ways almost no one could have predicted. For the people who survived, the nightmare did not end when the plague faded. It had only changed shape. Across Europe, entire neighborhoods stood empty. Homes collapsed without owners to repair them. Once crowded villages became overgrown with weeds. Church bells no longer rang because there was no one left to pull the ropes. Silence had replaced life. But here's the twist that few people expect. The Black Death didn't just destroy civilization, it accidentally transformed it. Imagine being one of the few surviving farmers in a village where half the population had vanished. Before the plague, landowners controlled almost everything. Workers were plentiful, wages were low, and most peasants had little choice but to accept whatever conditions they were given. Labor was cheap because people were everywhere. Now everything had changed. Fields still needed planting, animals still needed tending, roads still needed repairing, but there weren't enough hands to do the work. For the first time in generations, ordinary workers held something incredibly valuable. Their labor. Landowners who had once ignored peasants suddenly competed to hire them. Wages began to rise. Survivors could demand better conditions, shorter obligations, and sometimes even their freedom. The balance of power slowly shifted, not because of a king, not because of a revolution, but because disease had changed simple mathematics. Fewer people meant every surviving worker mattered more. Historians believe this labor shortage helped weaken the medieval feudal system across many parts of Europe. Feudalism was a social system where most people worked the land for powerful nobles in exchange for protection. It had shaped European life for centuries. The plague cracked its foundation, and once cracks begin to spread, entire systems can eventually collapse. Now, fair question. Could something so devastating actually improve life for anyone? In the short term, almost certainly not. Families had been shattered. Communities were traumatized. Children grew up surrounded by grief instead of grandparents. Entire generations carried emotional scars that history rarely records. Yet over the following decades, survivors often experienced opportunities that had never existed before. Land became available. Food became more plentiful because fewer mouths needed feeding. Some peasants inherited farms they never dreamed of owning. Others left rural villages entirely, moving into towns where skilled workers were suddenly in high demand. The plague had unintentionally created social mobility, something almost unimaginable in medieval Europe. Even the church faced a crisis. Thousands of priests died while caring for the sick. Many churches struggled to replace them. People began questioning why constant prayer had failed to stop such overwhelming suffering. If God was protecting the faithful, why had so many faithful people died? Those questions slowly changed how people viewed authority, religion, and knowledge. Centuries later, historians would argue that these shifts helped prepare Europe for enormous changes, including the Renaissance and eventually the scientific revolution. The search for answers became stronger than blind acceptance, because once you've watched an invisible disease destroy half your world, old explanations no longer feel enough. Science would eventually replace superstition. Observation would challenge tradition. Evidence would become more valuable than fear. Researchers studying ancient DNA have even recovered traces of Yersinia pestis from the teeth of plague victims buried hundreds of years ago. These tiny genetic fragments allow scientists to confirm what medieval people could never understand: that an invisible bacterium, carried by fleas and rodents, was responsible for one of history's greatest catastrophes. The mystery that terrified millions can now be seen under a microscope, but knowing the answer doesn't erase the horror, because the real lesson of the Black Death isn't only about bacteria. It's about how fragile civilization truly is. One thriving city, one busy marketplace, one crowded ship. Everything can change. And perhaps the most unsettling realization is this: the people who lived through the plague weren't careless or unintelligent. They simply lacked knowledge. They fought the greatest enemy they had ever faced without knowing it even existed. If you had lived beside them, you probably would have done exactly the same.